a short study of a ketamine for depression study. In March 2019, a new antidepressant became available in the United States. This has been classed as the first fundamentally new medicine for depression in decades. The controversial thing is that it's based on the anesthetic ketamine. The drug itself is called Spravato. Some psychiatrists have said that this drug was approved with little evidence to back it up, and also under standards that were less rigorous than those required for conventional antidepressants. Experiments on mice. Mice were the guinea pigs in one bit of research on ketamine. The researchers induced depression, shock and stress in mice by restraining them in mesh tubes or by injecting them with corticosterone, a stress hormone. It was then seen that the mice began to lose their taste for sweet water and didn't struggle when dangled by their tails. All this raises animal welfare issues, which are too complex and tangential to go into here. It can be asked how the scientists came to know that the depression or stress of these mice had lifted. Did the mice express that view? Of course not. So it must have been behavioral evidence that convinced those involved in this research. Well, 3 hours after a dose of ketamine, the mice's behavior did indeed improve, at least in these cases. Of course, no one can really make a big deal about ketamine making mice or people feel better within hours. Typical antidepressants can take weeks to start working. In terms of fast action, alcohol and cannabis can make people feel better within minutes. LSD and magic mushrooms can do the same thing within around 30 minutes to an hour. Indeed, I suppose that a heavy smash on the head could, in theory, do the same within seconds. It was thought at first that ketamine spurred new synapses, i.e., the connections between neurons. It turned out that newly created synapses aren't actually involved in ketamine's behavioral and mood effects. Nonetheless, synapses are still part of the story of ketamine and its effects. This shows us that we should never take a single study as gospel or even a whole group of studies. We, laypersons and scientists alike, often need to sit back and take stock. For example, who remembers when depression was seen to be all about serotonin? A few weeks later, to be rhetorical, it was seen to be all about dopamine or cat piss. Thus, any research into depression, or indeed into anything science-based, should be taken with extreme care. That's not an anti-science statement. It's simply a statement about particular research projects or studies at particular points in time. Indeed, being slightly skeptical about the glut of often contradictory scientific findings is often a highly scientific and rational position to take. If one were to accept all of them all of the time, then one would be rendered highly confused and indeed irrational. This also means that one shouldn't be committed to particular scientists, particular studies, or even particular disciplines within science. Instead, one should be committed to the communal reality of science as a whole, which usually has a self-correcting bias. The physicist Lee Smolin, in his The Trouble with Physics, sums part of this up neatly in the following passage. Scientists often do exaggerate and distort the evidence. Age, status, fashion, peer pressure all do play a role in the workings of the scientific community, but I would suggest that enough scientists adhere to enough of the ethic, i.e., the scientific ethic, that in the long run progress continues to be made. The antidepressant industry is huge, so we must also factor in financial clout and political pressure/power into these studies, as well as the importance of the US Food and Drug Administration. I mention the FDA because it approved a nasal spray, as stated in the intro, which contains a form of ketamine, i.e. esketamine, for depression only in March 2019. Technical terms galore. Of course, there are lots of technical terms to cope with in these studies. For example, we're told that ketamine slowly coaxes nerve cells in order to sprout new neural connections. More technically, Some 12 hours after ketamine treatment, new dendritic spines began to appear in the neurons found in a part of the prefrontal cortex of mice. These dendritic spines have been seen to be replacing those lost during the period of stress or depression. Prima facie, there's an assumption here that new neural connections are automatically a good thing. So what if a paranoid schizophrenic is making new neuronal connections which all reinforce his paranoia? And isn't it the case that new neural connections are being made all the time in animal brains? In any case, the neuroscientist Alex Kwan of Yale University happily tells us that there is still a lot of mystery in terms of how ketamine works in the brain. But isn't that the case with so many drugs which affect the brain and therefore the mind, even those which have been on the market for decades? Having put certain negatives, there will be a temptation to criticize the positives simply because it's ketamine that we're talking about here. Yes, ketamine is not only a drug, it can also be an illegal drug, i.e., it's a controlled substance. Though, as everyone knows, the various social, moral, and legal lines between illegal and legal drugs are often vague, highly contingent, and very rarely backed up with good arguments.